broken. Something has changed in Egypt and the region. There has been a setback, of course, because of the coup, but there is a determination nonetheless by a large proportion of the population, probably the majority, that they want change and that this sort of regime is not going to deliver. So I don't think the regime as it is today is sustainable, and ultimately it's going to become an increasing liability to its supporters internationally.
Now, you seem to share the optimism of Yahya Hamid, who's a former minister in Morsi's government, who I met recently in Istanbul, who, one of the few still at large, if I may say, use that terminology, and he was optimistic that the people of Egypt would not accept for too much longer return to the authoritarian regime of Mubarak. Is he right to be optimistic? Do you think the sentences of the recent sort of leaders of the 2011 revolution and the wide clampdown on civil liberties, freedoms of expression, as you mentioned, it will provide the spark that reignites the revolution? Or should we, in the words of Professor John Esposito, who I spoke to just last week, prepare for a long, dark winter in Egypt?
I am sure that the current regime is not going to survive. As the Egyptian Revolutionary Council, we are committed to continuing this resistance because we know that change will come from within Egypt, and that ultimately the barrier of fear has broken in Egypt. And despite all the repressive measures taken by the current regime, and that kind of repression is escalating day by day, and the political space is non-existent in order to maneuver, nevertheless the resistance and the struggle continues. I think the failure of the regime has become apparent to all, even to those who initially supported the regime and came out on June the 30th. I think many of them are disillusioned now. It is a matter of mobilization, and the mobilization will happen. It will increase in terms of numbers, but as with all revolutions, it takes time. But time is on our side, not on the side of the military dictatorship.
Now, you mentioned something I think quite critical about the barrier of fear has been broken. Now, I've heard this referred to before. I was speaking with Reverend Jesse Jackson, a very famous civil rights leader in America, when he spoke about the March on Washington and how suddenly the barrier of fear had been broken and people were prepared to go to any lengths to ensure that they had their freedoms. Do you believe, especially when we hear in the last few days news of the sentencing of Alaa Abdel Fattah, one of the icons of Egypt's 2011 revolution, and not a traditional supporter of Mohammed Morsi or the Brotherhood, and 18 other defendants who were sentenced to 3 years and 5 years and all paying large fines of over $13,000, which were just the latest in a series of severe sentences. Do you not believe that this sort of imposition of fear is actually having some effect on the people?
Of course, that is exactly what General Sisi, his interior minister and security forces want to do. And this is what they've been doing since the coup, to reinstill that fear. They're trying to teach the people of Egypt a lesson. They're saying, if you speak out, you're not just only going to be imprisoned, you're going to be tortured and raped. And that's what's happening in Egypt's prisons today. But despite that level of repression, there is continuing resistance. And we know from history, we know from other parts of the region, and we know from revolutions elsewhere, that eventually the momentum is such that no level of repression can actually stop people standing up to this sort of regime. Because ultimately, if they're not gaining anything by it, even for those that were willing to support the regime, economically he's a failure. In terms of security, the situation is unstable. And politically, as I said, the barrier of fear is broken. And there is a demand by a new generation of Egyptians to have freedom, to have the right to speak out, the right to hold their government accountable, in order to have, they want to have a say in the future of their country and the development of their country. We're talking about an Egypt that is extremely corrupt, that has not provided to the majority of its people who are poor. Over 40% of Egyptians live on $2 a day. Now, that is a poor country, and it doesn't need to be that poor. There is an extreme level of corruption, and that is what Egyptians also want to change. It is about freedom. The struggle is about freedom and about rights. And I don't think that the military regime will be able to survive in the face of growing anger at this level of corruption and the level of repression that is continuing today.
Dr Maha Azzam, it's been a real honour and a pleasure to have you on Islam Channel. And on that very profound note, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you.